welcome you to the zoning hearing board meeting of Tuesday, March 29th, 2022. If you care to join us, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are we missing somebody?
Jamie and Brad.
No, John.
Oh.
Oh.
He's in the building.
He's in the building.
Stealth.
Yeah.
Ninja name.
One point of order, applicant 3127 has requested to be the last application that we hear tonight. So that would mean applicant 3128 would be the second application. Is there anyone here from 3128? John Weckerly, Boxwood. Is that okay with you guys? You go second instead of third?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, John's back. Starting tonight with Appeal 3126, the applicant, Philly Massons LLC, property located at 739 South Roberts Road, zoned R1 residential. Applicant seeks relief from Section 280-15E of the code to keep the existing home's foundation wall location, which breaches the current setback. The structure is currently a legal non-conforming structure, and the applicant is seeking relief to put a new foundation in the exact same location. Can the applicant come up? Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. Kunle Ali, Kunle, last name Ali. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Finally.
So I'm basically seeking relief to keep the existing foundation of, a single family non-conforming legal structure. Most of the foundation is, there's parts of the foundation that's breaching the current setback, and one of the areas is in the garage where it's a single story right now, and my new floor plan adds on top of that, so I don't want to basically have to, try to repair the foundation, but basically tear it all out and rebuild. There's portions of it that are going away with the new floor plan, so I believe that we're improving the violation of the setback.
Okay, so are you with Philly Massons LLC?
I'm the owner of Philly Massons LLC.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. And they're the they're fee owner of the property?
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Just start with that. So I believe that one of the best ways to show it is the two side-by-side.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I have a microphone up here. Maybe you can use this so you can test. Test. Yep.
Thank you.
That might be better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I believe that one of the best ways to show it is a side-by-side image of both the existing property and the new property that will be built on the site. This is from the site plan that's currently approved. On the left side shows the existing structure. I'm sorry if it's not as clear, but I think you all have copies of this.
Yes, I believe we do.
So the yellow part highlighted on the left side is actually...
Excuse me, we should probably mark these. This sheet would be A1.
I'm sorry, what's the identification in the bottom right-hand corner of the plan?
It says drainage area plan 707.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
So we'll call that A1, okay? Let's just go through the rest of them in sequence. The next one has A1 written on it.
Yeah, I had to, I'm sorry. I had to
we're-
pick pages from both the site and the architectural that was relevant without kind of giving you too many pages at the same time.
All right. Well, let's leave A1 as A1. The one I just said was A1, let's make that A2. Unless there's another, yep. And the next one, it says 3 of 7 at the bottom. Let's make that A3. The last sheet, there's an A4. And then the one that says 2 of 7, we'll just make that A5. Okay, so the sheet you currently have up, well, you did have A2 up.
Did you want to see A1 first, or?
Whatever you'd like to do. It's
Okay.
your presentation.
Yes. So I would prefer to show you A2 first.
Okay, thank you.
On the left side is the existing structure, and the yellow highlighted part is also violating the setback, and that portion is going to go away in the new floor plan. And the highlighted yellow part is what's being added to the footprint of the home. The relief basically is to seek to keep the rear wall all along, the same rear wall, basically. Same rear location, and have the foundation be poured in that same location.
At the back of the house, the wall at the back of the
Yeah,
house?
the wall at the back of the house.
Okay. And is there somewhere to show that how that's non-conforming right now?
Yes, on A1.
On A1, okay.
The highlighted dashes basically show the areas of the new house that are non-conforming.
I see.
And all of that is the existing footprint of the home as is, except that there was a portion to the right of this that is currently there, that's being taken down and not being rebuilt. So all of that portion to the right actually violates the setback. So we're kind of improving it, I believe, a little bit.
Yes, yeah, okay. So other than that addition on the left side we're looking at, everything's still on the same kind of footprint that you had
Yes.
with the existing house? Okay.
The lot is a kind of a pizza pie. It's 0.9 acres, and I have a letter from my architect stating how challenging it is to try to build brand new and have it, meet, because it's also on a corner lot, so it has 2 front setbacks and a rear setback. So it's really tough to get a feasible, buildable area without keeping the existing rear wall foundation. Location, sorry.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
All right, so on A1, the highlighted section to the left,
Yes.
no, the one that's marked A1, I think it's the one that you had up already,
Okay.
right? It says A1 in the lower right-hand corner?
Yes.
Yeah. So the highlighted section to the left says finished basement, stairs. That's existing footprint of the building?
The
Or-
finished basement stairs, I believe that's existing footprint of the building.
Right, but, okay, right, it's marked new, so I don't think I understand what you're proposing then.
You said it's marked new?
You know, on the drawing itself, it says new.
That's the exhibit that we've identified as A2.
Yeah, I made these copies after submitting the ones to you. I believe that highlight it's a mistake on my part.
So the existing then, if we go back to the pre-developed drainage area exhibit,
Yes,
what's highlighted there in yellow, that's existing, correct? That you're taking out?
so I made these copies after submitting to, because I made 10.
Okay.
And I didn't make an 11th one for myself, so I had to highlight it afterwards. You're asking me which area?
Which one are you missing?
He's asking me a question about this
It's-
page.
It's the same one that you have up. So
Okay.
on the left-hand side,
Mm-hmm.
right, there's a yellow box there. Right where your pointer is.
Right here, yes.
Yeah, that's existing.
That's existing.
You're removing that.
I'm removing that, yes.
Okay, so then if we go back to what was A1,
A1, yes.
that is not, this is what you're proposing to do, correct?
Yes, that's not there because it's removed.
Okay. And the sections of the home to the 40, that encroach on the 40-foot rear yard setback, that's existing, correct?
Yes, all of that is
Okay.
existing.
Right, but you're proposing to pull out the foundation and re-pour a
re-pour it,
foundation?
yes.
But in that same footprint?
In the exact same location.
Understood, okay. I have a procedural question as well. I don't know if in Radnor we require, but it's an LLC that owns, is council required?
No, we're not a court of law, so we are quasi judicial, but no, our specific rules don't require it, and nor does the MPC.
Okay.
In fact,
And-
our rules let somebody give a power of attorney to any individual. It actually mentions that.
All right.
No, there's no requirement.
One other procedural then. So the deed that we have is not recorded, doesn't have a recording stamp, nor do the certificates of formation for the LLC.
That would just go to whether or not, to its veracity. I mean, if you want to accept it as a copy of something that was recorded and proves ownership, that would be one thing. But you can obviously question them about
Sure,
it.
okay. So I'll do it, since I raised the question. The deed is on record in Delaware County?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And the company, Philly Masons LLC, that company exists?
Yes,
In the
it's in good
Department of
standing, yes.
Corporations? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I brought what I got at settlement, and that wasn't.
It's okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So maybe I do have another question then.
Yes.
So on the post-developed drainage area, I think that's what you have on top.
Yes, yes.
So on the right-hand side picture, there's also some highlighted area
Yes,
that says new.
yes, that's showing the new, if you took the existing house and just saw the footprint of the home, the highlighted portion is new, it's not existing right now. That would be added to the home when we rebuild it, basically.
But how then does that compare to this A1 drawing?
So that location is all inside of the current setback. Everything that's added is inside of this box right here. It's the same highlighted location right here. So that's the only place we
It's
could
flipped
add.
upside down. It's flipped. So just switch sides.
That's what I was thinking.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Now I understand.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So I also have a letter from the only neighbor I share a boundary with, and he's wrote a letter in support of me basically improving the property,
That,
rebuilding.
Victor Octay,
Yes.
that's in your package.
Yes.
We have that.
Vigden,
Victon, Vicdan, Oktay, O-K-T-A-Y. I think I got that right. Okay. Yeah, make it, that's what, yeah, A6. The application A6. Do you have anything else to add on the other exhibits presented?
No, I mean, I added pictures of the current home and just views from my neighbor's house as well. And he's on board with keeping the existing footprint.
Okay, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I mean, I could just summarize and say that hoping that we're asking for the minimum relief to, keep this
Right.
existing foundation.
Any questions from the board?
I have just a simple question. Why can't you just pour a new foundation up against the existing foundation?
I guess we could do that, but that would still be violating the setback.
No, because the way I read it is the existing foundation still exists.
Oh, okay.
All you're doing is beefing it up, if you will.
I didn't realize we had that option. Sorry.
I'm making an interpretation. Is it all right? Everybody?
I don't know what, I mean, I don't know exactly what he is, or to my understanding is based on the application, he's completely removing what's
Yes.
there. Right.
Agreed.
No, right.
That's what's in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
What's the condition of the existing foundation? Can you build on it? Or is it deteriorated?
It's holding 2 stories on certain parts of the house, so I believe we can still salvage some parts of it, but at the garage, it's not thick enough. It will have to be underpinned, and that's about 30% of that new house.
Do you have concerns as to the structural integrity of the existing foundation?
I believe so, and we would like to have a deeper basement, which is what the plan is, so hopefully we don't have to underpin to get that deeper basement.
Okay, no other questions. Any public comment? Can I ask for a motion from the board?
Sure, I'll make a motion. I make a motion to approve the application based on the exhibits as presented and based on the testimony that it'll stay within that existing footprint.
Is there a second?
Second?
Yes. Yes, you could ask us to move your exhibits into the record.
Yes, please move all the existing exhibits into the record.
We will.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, so no further discussion, the board. We'll have a vote. John Nagel?
Aye.
John Lord?
Aye.
Rich?
Aye.
Aye.
And I also vote in favor. Your application has been approved. Good luck
Thank
with
you.
your project.
Thank you all.
right.
Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Have a good night. Okay, and as I mentioned, we're skipping over now to Appeal 3128. The applicant, John Weckerly of Boxwood Architect, property located at 110 North Wayne Avenue in Zone Wayne Business Overlay District. The applicant seeks relief from Section 280-122C3 of the code to allow signage on the front entrance awning. The proposed is 6 inches above the allowable vertical face of 14 inches. Sign letters are being proposed at 6 inches high, with the bottom of the letters at 14 inches and the top at 20 inches. Welcome. I do.
John Weckerly, Foxwood Architects. Thank you for your time, everybody. As mentioned, my name is John Weckerly, Principal at Foxwood Architects. I have with me here tonight Pearl and Noy Samboonsong, the owners of P-E-A-R-L S-O-N-B-O-O-N-S-O-N. So they're here to support the project. As I said, they're the owners and operators. I'm sorry. Pearl and Noy are the owners of the building and also the operators of the proposed restaurant going into the location. The address is 110 North Wayne Avenue, previously occupied as the Matador Restaurant, seen here in this photo. On January 12th, we presented the facade improvements to the Design Review Board to include removal of the existing sign, replacement of the windows, and introduction of the proposed here, what we're presenting here tonight, which is the awning over the main entrance of the building. As Chair communicated, when we identified the awning in the zoning submission, we were struggling to identify whether it was a marquee or awning. Aesthetically, I lean more towards the marquee. However, based on the definition of the code in the zoning code, I felt as though it was more in keeping with the definition of an awning, in the sense that a marquee is identified for theater and entertainment purposes. However, aesthetically, the position was that the aesthetics are more in keeping with the marquee. This is
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but your boards are upside down.
Oh, I'm sorry. So this board here is the package that we submitted to as part of the zoning application, and as Chair communicated, the awning is a proposed metal feature that includes an 11-inch tall scroll at the bottom of the feature, to the extent that the sign is being proposed directly above that feature, which in essence falls outside of the allowable 14-inch height of the allowable sign band for a sign. So the maximum sign letter being 8 inches, with the top of the sign at 14 inches above the bottom of the awning. We're proposing that the bottom of the letter is at 14 inches with a 6-inch proposed letter, with the distinction that the flat band that allows us to incorporate the signage happens directly above these decorative scrolls that happen at the bottom of the sign.
And just for the record, what you're pointing at is identified, I believe, as number 3 on the site plan elevation and photos form that was part of your application.
Yes, on document
Thank you.
ZH101, drawing 3, yes.
Thank you.
Sorry. That's everything. Questions?
I have a question. Why do you need if you didn't have the scroll, it would work, right? And
Yes, sir.
Why do you need the scroll?
The scroll, as part of the original, this is the second location, and the spirit for this architectural element came from the first location and the aesthetics of the facade on the first location. And in an effort to present itself as a quality design to the community, this is the architectural gesture that is being proposed. And if the scroll is not seen as an enhancement to the awning, we certainly would would look to reevaluate the placement of the letters relative to that. You know, in presenting this feature as part of the design review board, it was well received across the board. So at that point, we understood that it was non-conforming on the distinction that it didn't fall within the height allowable height requirements of the awning. However, you know, based on this being an architectural feature for the building in conjunction with needing to accommodate the requirements of the sign, we're proposing to maintain the scrolls just given their decorative impact to the facade.
And there'll be no wall signage above the awning?
No, sir. The only other sign is in the lower right-hand side, which is an existing menu box that we're proposing to replace in kind.
And excuse me, is the lettering illuminated?
The lettering is being proposed to be illuminated, which we did not present to the DRB when it was not being proposed as illuminated at that time. Since that point, in working with the owners, we've agreed to present the idea of illuminating it, so we realize we need to go back to the DRB in order to propose that.
So there's nothing similar to the existing Matador sign that you intend on putting up?
No, if you look at drawing 4, rendering 4, this is what our proposed end design is being proposed as. So the Matador sign goes away entirely, no box sign. This is a half-round feature to go with the half-round tops on the windows, keeping in line with that height.
Any questions from the board?
Curious as why you just couldn't drop the sign 6 inches? Make it conforming?
If we drop the sign 6 inches, we would be within the scrolls, and the scrolls are integral to the aesthetic feature.
No, drop the whole assembly.
I think
Lower it.
Would people be walking into it at that point?
I think there might be we would have to check that, but I think there would be, I believe that the zoning requirement
There's
for
a
the.
limit how far you can
Right,
go
for
down.
the zoning requirement for the letters is that the maximum height for the letter is 14 to the top of the letter. So dropping the whole thing down wouldn't get away from that non-conforming issue.
There are 2 different issues, right? And one, the height itself, and then the second one.
No, I believe we're okay with the height because the minimum is 7 feet above grade, and our sign is being proposed at 9'10" to the bottom of the sign. So I think we're okay in that regard. It's really the placement of the letters relative to the inclusion of the scroll. It is correct to say that if the scroll was not there, we could lower the sign and be conforming. However, the aesthetics of the scroll as it relates to the overall architectural feature, our request is to be granted approval to create the overall feature.
Any other questions from the board? Is there any public comment? I'll ask for a motion from the board.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the applicant's request for relief be granted based on the plans and testimony presented this evening.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, board discussion.
I haven't heard any discussion of hardship. What is the hardship?
Well, I'm not answering that question, but
I'm sorry, I didn't know if that, when I said board discussion, I didn't know if that was directed to me or to the board.
well, I'll give you my sense. I know these rules are in inches, but we're talking about 6 inches. Yes.
I would be happy to amend my motion to reflect a de minimis variance as opposed to the specific relief that was granted. Mr. Chairman, may I amend my motion to, permit the relief requested, not the specific relief requested by the applicant, but a de minimis variance relief from the requirements of section, he delays quickly, but it's 280-122 C3. As a de minimis variance as opposed to a hardship-based variance.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Any board discussion? All those in favor of the motion? John? Aye. John?
Aye.
Rich?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
And I'm in favor. Application's been approved. Good luck with your project. Good luck with the restaurant.
Appreciate it.
Good luck.
George, I know we have 14 minutes, but are you ready to go, or we have to wait, I guess, for,
I assume we're waiting for Mr. Greenfield.
yeah. All right. We promised we'd wait to 7:45, so we'll take a little break here.
We're ready. Mention that.
George, ready to get started? Okay. This is appeal number 3127, the applicant Lawrence and Kimberly Kimmel, property located at 328 West Laurier Place and zoned R1DM residential. The applicant requests a variance from section 280-112D and 280-112E of the code to permit disturbance of and improvements upon areas of steep slopes in connection with the proposed addition of an indoor sports court on the property, as well as any other relief deemed necessary to construct the proposed improvements. Counselor.
Good evening. I'm George Brosman. I represent the applicants, Larry and Kimberly Kimmel, who are seated here in the front row. I had a couple of housekeeping matters, one of which I spoke to Mr. Greenfield about. As the board knows, we were here extensively before. I believe it was in matter appeal number 3116.
Yes.
And that was denied by virtue of a tie vote of the board. And I had spoken with Mr. Greenfield.
Well, the
and-
good news is there's 5 of us today.
Yes. I had spoken with Mr. Greenfield, and I wanted to incorporate the record from that proceeding.
Okay.
And in that way, maybe we don't have to go over some of the old ground that we did before. I think Mr. Greenfield did not object to that.
We're in agreement with that.
Yeah. No objection here.
Okay. And you'll see, I'm going to hand out some exhibits. I have some of the old exhibits are reproduced here for convenience
Okay.
sake, just so you don't, you would have them at your fingertips, but I'll probably just start kind of in the middle. That was number one. Number two, I just wanted to note for the record, Mr. Economides had been sending out some letters. Thank you for receiving those. Some of those were from party opponents represented by Mr. Greenfield, and I wanted to, ask that they not be allowed in the record, and I feel those people should have to, testify and be subject to cross-examination since they are in opposition and represented by counsel. So
Well, I'm going to admit them to the record. We received these letters. If anyone wants to speak tonight, they can speak of record and be cross-examined. We're going to give the appropriate weight to these letters
okay.
in our deliberations.
Okay.
So on that point, I'll mention we got 12 letters, and they will be made part of the record. We also got a memorandum of objectors to application, which will make part of the record.
Thank you. And if I may, I would like to hand out my exhibit package. And I have a copy for Mr. Greenfield.
Thanks.
These probably are not in the folder.
Well, some of them might be repeats, but ask for an extra one.
Many are repeats, so.
George, do
If
you
you had
have
another one for
do you have
file.
one more copy for the file?
Yeah.
As long as we have two in the file.
So I'm going to call, my first witness will be David Fiorello. Just to not go over ground, since we did incorporate the record, let me mention the ones that are here. A1 is the current application, just a copy of what we filed. A2 was an aerial view. That was in the record before. A3 were photographs that were in the record before. A4 are the selected sheets of the approved plans for the Laurier development. A5 was the grading permit for this property, Lot 20. A6 was the grading permit plans for this property, Lot 20. A7 was the email that we received from Kevin Kachansky, the zoning officer, saying that he agreed which slopes were exempt. And then A8 is David Fiorello's CV. And with that, I'm going to start in with Dave Fiorello and probably start at A9. So Dave. And in the record last time, it was said that David is an engineer, and he
Yeah,
he
we'll
was
accept him as an
accepted.
expert.
Thank you. I don't hear one. David, are you still the civil engineer for Larry and Kimberly Kimball for this project?
Yes, I am.
And were the plans that we're going to be discussing this evening prepared under your supervision?
They were prepared by me, yes.
And at the last hearing, you went over the existing conditions of the property. Since that time, are you aware of any changes in the condition of the property?
No changes to my understanding.
And in our exhibit package at A9, is this the current set of plans that we submitted with this new application?
Yes, these plans are dated February 7th. There are some revision dates on there that were left over from a prior plans. We had taken the prior plans and updated them. I failed to take those revision dates off. So the current date for these plans are the ones on there listed as February 7th.
And we have smaller copies of A9 in the package, and we'll be referring to the larger copies that are on the table and up on the screen as we proceed. And like last time, have you identified the areas of 20% slope or more with numbers?
Yes, there are areas that are color-coded. All those slopes are, we've delineated in lighter colors, slopes of 14 to 20%. Slopes 0 to 14 aren't shaded at all, but the slopes 20% and greater are heavier colors and numbered.
And did we use the same numbers from Appeal 3116, 1 through 7?
Yes, we did.
And those are shown on sheet 1, which is the existing conditions plan, is that correct?
Correct.
And then let's go to the proposed plan, which is sheet 2 of Exhibit A9. So on this proposed plan, have you shown those same slope areas with the same numbers?
Yes, I have.
And using this plan, can you describe the current proposal?
The current proposal is a reduction in the scope of the building. The prior building was a sports court with an outdoor combined pool house and swimming pool area. The swimming pool area has, and the pool house part of the building has been removed from this plan. Prior plan had a batting cage associated with it. That's been removed. So the footprint shown here is just for the sports court, tennis court, basketball court.
And on the prior plan in Appeal 3116, there was a driveway extension and a parking area?
Yes, that parking area and the driveway extension to the building that came off of the main driveway has been removed. And on this plan, we've actually reoriented the building parallel to the rear property line, pull it further back into the property.
So you'll go into the numbers, but that had the effect of moving it further away from the Adams and Mullen properties?
Yes, it did.
And even though you did that, is the building also slightly further away from the rear setback line at its closest point?
Yes, the building, as we show it here, is 56.7 feet off of the property line. The required setback is 50 feet. Prior plans had showed it just a little bit more than 50 feet.
But for the steep slope relief that we're appearing before the board, has this plan been designed to comply with the applicable dimensional criteria, the R1 Residence District, and the density modification development provisions?
Yes, it has.
And I'd like to go over those provisions with you to some degree. Let's talk about setbacks. So do the plans comply with all of the applicable setbacks?
Yes, they do.
And specifically, can you go through the setbacks from the adjoining properties for the proposed improvements?
Our dimensions are shown on the plans from the property lines, but questions came up before on distances from the various adjacent properties. From Lot 13, which is the site to the east of this, we are 226 feet away from the property line with the building. From the Adams property in Lot 22, we are 126 feet. From the Mullen property, we are 132. And from Mill Road, we have a distance roughly 180 feet from the property line along Mill Road.
And in the last go-around, we talked about that certain setback nonconformities would be eliminated, one for a pool house and one for the existing lighted tennis court.
Yes.
Will those still be removed?
Yes. This plan shows the removal of the existing swimming pool and the pool house that are located in the southern portion of the property. The existing tennis court is being removed, and our new tennis court is being placed within the required setbacks.
Does the project still comply with the applicable building coverage limits?
Yes, it does.
And what are the limits and what is proposed?
The total proposed building coverage is now at 9.74%. Prior application was 12.3%. Under density modification, I think the building coverage,
20%, 5 extra?
yeah, 25%, 20%, yes.
So when you say it's 9.74% under the 20%, you're counting the new structure in those calculations?
Yes, there's actually a net reduction in the impervious coverage in the well, there's an increase in the building coverage. There's actually a net increase in the decrease in the impervious coverage as a result.
So let's go over the impervious cover limits. Where do we stand with regard to that?
Impervious allowable under the density modification zoning is 27%. Currently, we're at 14.74%, and with the new proposal, we're at 14.05%.
And do you recall what was the impervious under the plan at Appeal 3116?
I don't recall off the top of my head. I think it was closer to 21%.
If I said 20.99%, would that refresh your memory?
I think that was. I knew it was close to 21.
So just to get this straight, this plan actually reduces impervious coverage over what is there today.
Yes.
And how is that done?
With the removal of the swimming pool, the pool house, and there's a reductions associated with that. Our tennis court facility here is not that much bigger than the existing tennis court. So with a reduction in the removal of the pool and the pool house and the improvements associated with that, there's roughly a 800 square foot reduction in the impervious cover.
Now, is it your understanding, based on township regulations, that even though impervious coverage will be reduced over existing conditions, the township will still require new stormwater management?
The current ordinance requires stormwater management for all new and replacement impervious cover. So the tennis court is new. I think the building itself is over 8,500 square feet. So stormwater management is required and will be provided for that new impervious cover.
So when you say new, the township, when they apply the stormwater provisions, they treat that as new, even
Yes,
though it was replacing?
The ordinance is strictly new and replacement impervious, so yes.
And does that existing tennis court of about the same size have stormwater management controls for it?
No, it wasn't. As part of the original Laurier subdivision that was done back in the 90s, I was a project engineer on that. The tennis court was existing at the time, and it was included as prior runoff. So there was no stormwater management implemented as part of the subdivision for that tennis court since it was existing at the time.
And you were here last time, correct?
Yes.
Did you hear some potential concerns of some of the neighbors about stormwater runoff associated with this project?
Yes, there were concerns raised.
In your professional opinion, are those concerns warranted?
I think with this project, with the reduction in the impervious, the stormwater management that has to be implemented, that there will be a net reduction in runoff from the site as a result.
Do the plans still note that all applicable height requirements will be satisfied?
Yes.
And we're not seeking any relief from height requirements, correct?
Correct.
Will this project need to be reviewed also by the Township Shade Tree Commission regarding tree
Yes.
replacement?
It will.
Honing in on the steep slope relief at A9B, just to re-identify them for the record, you got a determination from the zoning officer, Kevin Kachansky, that certain areas on this plan are exempt. Which are those?
Those areas are identified as Area 6 and Area 5A.
So those areas require no relief?
Correct.
And with the current plans, what are the areas of non-exempt, I'll call them, slopes that are proposed for disturbance?
Area 2 is, surrounds the existing tennis court. That will be fully disturbed. There's a small section noted as Area 3 uphill of that area that was artificially created, in my mind, as part of the tennis court construction. Area 4 will be disturbed. That area was created when the dwelling was built back in the late 90s. It wasn't shown on the grading permit plan as new contours, so that was determined to be regulated. And a small portion of Area 5B behind the house will be probably an adjustment to the stairway coming up to from the patio. There's a small area in the corner of that, in the area of the existing walkway, that will probably be disturbed as a result of that.
And on this exhibit, sheet 2 of A9, could you point out the existing stairway that you mentioned?
That area is shown right behind the house off the patio, rises up to and leads up to an area where the existing pool is.
So it's sort of, I would say, to the west of Area 5B?
It's
And-
between Area 5, well, we're talking, yeah, it's between Area 5B and Area 4.
Okay. At the prior hearing in Appeal 3116, some of the board members expressed some concern over the prior disturbance to the larger Area 1, which was closest to the Adams property. With the current plan, were you able to eliminate the disturbance to Area 1?
Yes, we don't have any disturbance to Area 1 as a result of this plan.
And just to complete the thoughts here, previously Area 7 was not to be disturbed. Is that still the case?
That is still the case.
We went over this before, so I don't want to belabor it, but if you could turn to the photographs, and we're skipping A10, that was intentionally omitted, but A11, the first photograph, and I'd like you to walk through these photographs, explain what is shown here, and as you do, point out and describe what is being counted as the steep slope in question. I assume it's that retaining wall?
The area behind the retaining wall, if you're looking at the plan, the Area 2 is an L-shaped configuration. This is the long length that parallels the wall of the existing tennis court. The slopes there are greater than 20%, and in my professional opinion, they were man-made as a result of grading for the tennis court.
So there's the first photograph, the second photograph.
Second photograph is taken uphill looking down, showing the area to the left is the small portion of the L-shaped area, again dug in to create a flat area for the tennis court.
And that was A11B. A11C.
A11C is an area.
Off the screen here.
Okay. A11C is in the corner of the existing tennis court. The stairway leads up, and the area behind the tree is roughly the Area 4. But in this photograph behind the fence, you can see the embankment behind the wall that is delineated as slopes greater than 20%.
And is there one more? Yeah.
Yes.
A11D.
Again, you're looking towards the crotch of that steep slope area in the corner of the tennis court. You can see the slopes behind the fence there created to blend that area into the top of the wall.
And that corner is the corner that is now in the required setback?
Yes, it is.
And then A3, could you go to A12, the next? Does that photo show?
That photo
A3.
shows Area 3, that is an embankment area right in that area of vegetation.
And then Area 4, this sort of, as you mentioned, connects with Area 2.
Yes, that is shown, again, along the walkway coming up. It really isn't evident on this plan here, maybe the other one, but that embankment area along the walkway is generally the area of Area 4.
And that's A13.
Yes.
And then our last one was Area 5B. I'm at photo A15. There's two of them there. Could you describe those?
A15 is the photograph of the current walkway coming up from the back of the flagstone patio. It is a combination of lawn and stone stepping stones to work your way up the embankment. The area to to the left side of this is the portion of 5B.
And I just noted, I don't know if all the packages are like this. There's an A14B, which should have been with A14. Is that part of Area 4?
Yes, it is.
And then last time we had a chart at A16. Is this a chart that shows the non-exempted areas by number and how much is being disturbed?
Yes, it
And
is.
could you run through that?
Area 1, approximate disturbance is 0. Again, as I mentioned, we took any work out of Area 1. Area 2, there's 1,977 square feet of steep slopes. Area 3 is 492 square feet. All of that will be disturbed. Area 4 is 410 square feet. We're proposing that area to be disturbed. And then Area 5B is roughly 300 square feet of that we figure will be disturbed with the adjustment of the steps and the walkway behind the patio.
So what's the total disturbed area?
3,179 square feet.
And we added a column from the prior plan. Is that the disturbance that was shown in the plan for Appeal 3116?
Yes. Big difference is reduction of Area 1 and reduction in the scope of Area 5B.
So there's a substantial reduction in the amount of the disturbance to the steep slopes?
Yes, more than 50%. More than 50%.
And how big did you say the property is total?
Just shy of 3 acres.
At A17, it was in the record last time, just for convenience. Is that a copy of the Township Code Section 280-112, the provision for slope controls?
Yes, it is.
And in the prior hearing at Appeal 3116, even for the larger project with more disturbance, you had testified that you believed that the project was not inconsistent with the intent provisions of the steep slope regulations. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
In your professional opinion, will the new plan also not be inconsistent with those purposes?
Yes. It
And-
will not be inconsistent.
And in your opinion, is this new plan represent an improvement in that regard over the last plan?
Yes, I think it's a substantial reduction in the amount of impervious, or amount of steep slope disturbance.
And If this were to be approved, will the Kimmels be required to submit a grading permit that will be reviewed by the township engineer to ensure proper measures are being followed for installation of proposed improvements?
Yes.
And is that when they would also check the stormwater requirements?
Yes, we will prepare stormwater management plan that will have to be submitted along with the plan for review by the township.
And of course, the Kimmels would also have to get a building permit to be reviewed by the township as well?
Yes.
And some general testimony with regard to the requested variance. In your opinion, are there unique physical circumstances of the property that create an unnecessary hardship here with regard to these slopes?
Yes, I do.
And are those slopes the physical condition you're speaking of?
Yes.
Were these slopes created by the applicants?
No, they were not.
In your professional opinion, has the requested relief been minimized?
Yes, I believe that.
And would the reduction compared to the prior plan be some evidence of that?
Yes.
And the actual reduction in the amount of impervious coverage on the site over existing condition be evidence of that?
Yes.
In your professional opinion, if the board were to grant relief for the disturbance of these slopes as indicated on the chart, will there be a detrimental impact to any of the adjoining properties?
I don't know. I don't believe so.
In your opinion, will there be a detrimental impact to any further properties or the general health, safety, and welfare of the township?
No.
That's all I have for David.
Jim, do you have any questions?
I will, yes. Does the board want to ask some first, or you want me to?
I will ask a question, actually. And you may have said this, David, but I wasn't sure I got it. The new proposed building itself, just the building, is it smaller in square footage than the previous building that was proposed?
Yes, substantially.
By how much? What are we talking about?
I don't have the numbers before, but in my mind, it was on the order of 12 to 13,000 square feet. We're down to 8 and 8.5 thousand.
Okay, and I see you don't have the parking lot, and you don't have the driveway anymore. So how are the construction crews and trucks going to get back to the back of the property?
We do show disturbance in Area 6, which allows, we have grading shown there, which allows access from the circle in the driveway down through Area 6 to access the building.
I see.
With the removal of the swimming pool, access will most likely come through Area 5A, which was deemed as not regulated.
And Area 6 was also deemed exempt by the zoning officer, correct?
Yes.
And then finally, the footprint of the new building, how does it compare to the existing footprint of the tennis court that's there today?
The existing tennis court is 7,261 square feet. The new building, which includes the tennis court, includes the walkway to the house, and includes utility areas for heating and whatever. Square footage of that footprint is 8,579 square feet.
Okay. That's all the questions I had right now. Anyone else?
Yeah, did you calculate the percent of disturbance compared to the total steep slope? Not the lot size, but just the total steep slope.
All of the steep slope on the site, I didn't work those numbers out. I could probably take a look.
When you get a chance.
We can check that while the other witnesses
Yeah.
are testifying.
Thank you.
And maybe you can also check the
No other questions from the board? Jim?
Mr. Fiorello, you testified, I think, just a moment ago that the existing tennis court takes up, did you say 7,261 square feet?
Yes, I did.
And the new building would take up 8,579 square feet?
Yes.
What's the additional 1,318 square feet for?
Again, as I mentioned, there is a walkway leading from the court itself to the house, and there is an area for utilities, heating, cooling, maybe best answered by the architect, but those are my understanding of where the increases are.
And how much in square feet does each of those elements take up?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Is there any place else on this site where you could put this building without disturbing steep slopes?
I do not believe so.
How about if you moved it to the, closer to the southeast corner of the property where there's a large flat area? Could you put it there?
Just without measuring and maintaining setbacks, we'd be disturbing other portions of slopes on the site.
Meaning in Area 7?
Area 7, most likely Area 5B. We still have to maintain distances off of property lines.
Fair to say, is it not, that if you move the building to that portion of the property, the degree of steep slope disturbance would be significantly less than what you're now proposing?
I can't say that without reviewing that.
It would be less, correct?
Most likely.
When this project is built out as proposed, is it correct that construction vehicles are going to have to cross other areas of steep slopes?
Area 6, as I mentioned before, and Area 5A, which are delineated or which were deemed as non-regulated.
And they will also have to cross 5B, is that correct?
No, they will not.
And they will not have to cross 1 at all, is that your testimony?
Yes.
Okay. And you indicated that the hardship was the steep slopes on the property, correct?
Yes.
It's fair to say, is it not, that those hardships do not, that those slopes do not prevent the reasonable development of the property?
I'm not sure what you refer to by reasonable. I think we have slopes that surround areas of existing features. If any of those existing features were to be altered, there would be required, most likely, some type of disturbance of those slopes.
But it's fair to say, is it not, that those slopes have not prevented the development of a substantial dwelling, a tennis court, and a swimming pool on the property, right?
Correct. I think what I want to point out is areas 5B and 4, 5A and 6 were created as part of that development of that lot. It's just that some of the areas were not reflected on the existing or on the original grading plan, and therefore were not deemed to have been part of a prior approval.
And you acknowledge then that you have an agreement with the township that the areas 2, 3, 4, and 5B are regulated steep slopes that will be disturbed, correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Is there any area to the southwest of the dwelling where you could put the tennis court that would disturb less steep slopes, such as by turning the tennis court or turning the building?
I think we had that in the prior plan, and we were still disturbing those slopes.
Well, that was also because you're saying you were disturbing the same slopes in that plan.
Yes.
All right, there's no way to do it then in that part of the property without disturbing those slopes.
Other than building on the existing footprint of the tennis court. And again, I think with that, in order to allow the construction there, those slopes would have to be disturbed regardless.
Okay, that's all I have for Mr. Fiorello.
Thank you.
Just a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
Just listening to the testimony, this is a all year-round building?
Yes, sir.
It's going to be heated and
Yes.
and air-conditioned?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just one more question. Would this be considered an accessory building under Radnor's zoning code? Okay, here comes George.
This building is attached to the principal building, so it is,
Attached how?
with this connector that Mr. Fiorello spoke about.
The walkway?
Yes, it's an enclosed, and Mr. Kimmel can tell you why that's important to him. There were some questions for David that he said he would check on, so I'm going to go ahead with some other witnesses, and then I could bring him back to attempt to answer those, if that's okay. I was remiss, I forgot to have Mr. Kimmel testify. I was going to have him testify first, so I would like to call him now.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Lawrence, L-A-W-R-A-N-C-E. Spiller, S-P-I-L-L-E-R. Kimmel, K-I-M-M-E-L.
You should use the mic.
Yep.
Larry, after the tie vote from Appeal 3116, did you reconsider the project?
Yes, so.
And what did you do?
So, of course, I guess we had two separate hearings on two different dates. After the first hearing, one of the concerns was getting the building out of the setback. So for the second hearing, of course, we pulled the building out of the setback. I know there was a tie vote 2-2. I think the concerns of the voters that voted no were that it was still disturbing a lot of slopes and just the size of the building, and did we have to have a driveway, and did we have to have a parking area? And so I've directed my team to change a lot of that. Obviously, there were 6 things we were seeking. Of course, we wanted a driveway, we wanted a parking area, we wanted the tennis court. We also wanted a batting cage to play with my son. We wanted a pool house. So there were a number of things we were looking to do. We've now gotten rid of the pool house. We've gotten rid of the pool. We've gotten rid of the batting cage. We've gotten rid of the driveway. We've gotten rid of the parking lot. And we're left with essentially what was argued at the last hearing by the other council. I think in the closing statements, I think it was said 4 or 5 times, look, why can't they just build a tennis court if they don't want anything else? Why do they need a parking? Why do they need a pool house? And so that's what we've done. We've taken the advice from the board, we've taken the advice from the other council, and we've essentially done just that. We've just one indoor court that I can play year-round tennis with my 3 children. We've also moved the court back, so it's even further away from the neighbors. We've decreased the impervious coverage. I'm not sure what else we can do.
Thank you. That's all I have for Larry.
Any questions from the board?
Mr. Kimmel, you are generous in allowing people to use your property, correct?
Well, if a neighbor asks right now, can I take my son up, and it's a friend that wants to use it, I've let people use it in the past, some of which are the people that you represent. In fact, one of the people you represent has used the court a lot over the past year. And I've been okay with that because he's played with friends or me, and it's almost always been with me, and I'm okay with that.
And you allow a family member of one of the development residents to give private tennis lessons for a fee on that court, correct?
So you're referring to Scott Horowitz, who lives on West Laurier. His brother plays tennis. He's not a professional coach, he plays tennis. My 3 children want to learn how to play tennis. They're 10, 10, and 7. I asked Scott, can you have your brother come up and teach my 3 children how to play tennis last summer? And so he did. And we paid him to teach, this is the neighbor's brother, we paid him to teach my 3 children private lessons last summer. I assume that's what you're referring to.
And does he give lessons to people not in your family?
No.
He doesn't?
No. He's given, I believe on 1 or 2 occasions, my daughter's had some of her friends join in the lesson when, of course, my daughter was there, but outside of that, no.
The building that would house the tennis court would include what other features?
It would include an area for the heater and the air conditioner. I believe that's all. That's all. It's the purpose. I mean, of course, it's the sport court for tennis and basketball. And then outside of that, there's a heating and air conditioning area because we want to play year-round. That's the purpose of it. And that's it.
So the objective here really is just to get year-round play on the tennis court.
Absolutely.
And it's fair to say, is it not, that this is not something that you need, it's something you want. Fair?
It's something that I've always wanted, sure. I mean, I'll live without it, but it's something that my entire life, this has been my dream, my whole life, and it's been my dream to play with my kids. I can probably expand on that if you want. I can get a little personal if you'd like, but I don't know how personal the board wants me to get in that regard, why it's very important to me. And this has been pursued for the past 6 years for me, looking for land, looking for 3 acres to be able to do this, and to be able to play with my children year-round. Yeah, it's something, actually, since I was a kid that was important to me.
And it's correct, is it not, that when you bought this property about 4 years ago, right?
So we bought the property about 1.5 years ago, December of 2020, but we approached the owners of the house almost 4 years ago to see if their land was something that we could purchase because it had 3 acres, which we would need for Impervious. We then even approached Mr. Kachansky, met with him. We wanted to make sure that it was big enough and we weren't going to have any concerns. 2 concerns were addressed. One was the setback of the corner. The other was impervious coverage. Would there be enough impervious coverage, and would it be DM or R1? And I've learned a lot about that in the last 4 years. But
imagine.
But yeah, that's been the last 4 years for us.
And the when you bought the property, the purchase price was about $1.8 million?
That's correct.
Have you had an appraisal done on it since you bought it?
We have not had an appraisal done, no.
When you bought the property, you were aware of the topographical features of the property?
Sure, we walked the property and we knew what was on the property. That's one of the reasons we met with Mr. Kachansky ahead of time before we purchased the property.
Okay, and at the time you bought the property, did you review any plans that had previously been drawn for the property?
I don't know if I did or not. Plans as far as what the property looked like? I'm sure I did. I knew what the property looked like. I walked it. We only live 4 houses down, so I'm very familiar with the property.
Did you review any township records relating to the property when you bought it?
I personally did not. I know that Dave Fiorelli was involved back then as well. I know that he also met with me with Mr. Kachansky, so I'm sure they were reviewed, but I mean, I personally don't. I don't think to this day I would know what I'm looking at.
Thank you, Mr. Kimmel. I have no further questions.
Sure.
Larry, Mr. Greenfield was asking you, were you aware of the topographical features? I assume you looked at the existing tennis court?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I knew the property because I'd walked it numerous times with the owner who we bought from originally. I mean, we'd probably been up there 7, 8 times before I even purchased the property, and we'd walked the whole property many times with the Bergs, that's who owned the property. So,
And did you go in the back area, the areas of slope area 3 and slope area 4?
we walked the entire property, so I mean, I'd been there many times before we purchased the property.
And did you ever imagine that those would be something that you couldn't disturb?
I had no idea. You know, I knew about impervious coverage would be a concern to get under the, whether it was DM or not, 27% or 22%. Obviously, we're way under both. I was aware of a setback that I thought would be a de minimis setback we could get over, but certainly we've decided, even before the last hearing, to pull it out of the setback. Those were my two concerns. I would never in my wildest dreams think that disturbing some slopes would prevent this from happening.
And areas 2, 3, 4, and this end of 5B, did they look like natural hillside areas that would have environmental concerns with them?
I didn't think there'd be any concerns with anything on the property for what we were doing, and I still, from what all the experts I've hired, I haven't heard anybody say that there should be any concerns whatsoever. In fact, I know there are some concerns of other neighbors, and this should decrease the storm management in the area, so I think it's a win for everybody. It's also a beautiful structure, even though we're putting a lot of trees in front of it, but it's a really nice looking structure. It's not a barn or something that's offensive, and it's not even seen, which I know we'll get into later, but I think we're improving the property significantly.
And you have been also renovating the rest of the property?
We have, yeah, we've been renovating the house.
Okay, that's all I have.
And-
Mr. Kimmel, you're eliminating the pool from this proposal, correct?
That is correct.
Do you have plans to build a pool at some future date?
Right now, we do not. The pool, we're removing the pool because it's dangerous, it's old, I'm not sure how old the pool is, but my guess is it's very, very old, and it's not something I think is safe for my children to swim in. I don't think it's safe for anybody, quite frankly, on the property. So as of right now, and there's zero plans to build a pool on the property.
You have no intention to build a pool?
We did at the last hearing. We thought we would do a pool. We thought we would do a batting tunnel. We thought we would do a lot of things, but the priority really is playing year-round tennis with my children, and we have no intentions of building a pool.
Okay, thank you.
Just based on your testimony a minute ago, do I understand there is a drawing showing the proposed building?
So we have drawings that, well, they'll be shown, I guess, in a 3D model, so you'll get to see the building. We do have pictures that are being shown.
Where?
I
mean,
know
they're
that.
not here tonight, are they?
Oh, I believe they are. I mean, they're put in the 3D model. It's not the entire building, but they're put in a 3D model, so you can see what the building will look like from the first, I guess, from 0 up to the first couple of years for the closest neighbor, just so you can see what they'll see. I know that's being proposed by the landscape architect, and then I think after 5 years, no one can see anything. But
What's the height of the building? What's the highest point of the building?
I believe it's categorized by the average height, again, which I believe is 30 feet. I'm answering questions I should probably let the architect answer.
Okay.
But, I mean, I'm trying. I just don't really know all the details as far as, I mean, I have experts to know every detail, and I don't want to misspeak.
Okay.
But I believe the average height's 30 feet, 3 inches, I want to say. of the building. Pursuant to how the code identifies the height of the building, I believe it's 30 feet, 3 inches, and permitted is 35 feet. That's what I'm told. But
Okay, thank you.
anything.
Our next witness is Joe Blandy. Joe, you were here at Appeal 3116, is that correct?
Yes.
And at 822 is another copy of Joe's CV. It was in the old record, and he was accepted as an expert in landscape architecture, and I would be offering him again as an expert in landscape architecture.
I have no objections. Mr. Greenfield? Okay, thank you.
Joe, you're still the landscape architect for Larry and Kimberly Kimball?
Yes.
And when you were here last time, you, for 3116, you had done a landscape plan. Have you done a new landscape plan?
Yes, we have.
And I think we have that marked as exhibit, a smaller copy, A19. I'm going to put that out on the table here. We have A19A and A19B. Could you walk the board through your concept for a landscape plan for this project?
Sure. We are continuing with the thought of a multi-layered screening for the building structure. That's always been one of the highest priorities, along with helping to blend the architecture into the landscape, of course. So with this new design, with the removal of the access lane and parking area, we were able to bring some of the layered plantings further up in elevation and getting better and more complete coverage from them in this particular area here. We also are adding screening down right at the property border with the Adams residence, and continuing to also screen right at the foundation of the building itself.
And that A19A, that shows it in context of the entire lot and some of the neighboring lots?
That's correct.
And could you flip to A19B? That's just a kind of a more close-up of the same thing?
Yes.
And what were some of the key objectives of your landscape plan?
Well, again, screening and blending the architecture into the landscape was really the main priority. Looking at drainage and making sure that the appropriate plant species were planted in different areas that might be more wet and more dry. So we're always looking at that, and then also planning for increased deer resistance is a very high priority as well.
And when we were here at Appeal 3116, you had, Mr. Kimmel referenced this, you had worked with the architect to get some 3D models created. Have you done that for this plan as well?
Yes, we've updated them with the new design.
And you could walk us through those. Before that, A20, we had this last time. Was this the species list?
Yes, it is.
And is it the same as before?
It is.
And can you describe, these species and why you chose them and how they'll be effective?
Well, we were selecting species that were not only fast-growing species, but also deer-resistant and hardy to our climate zone. So those were the three main parameters that we were going for.
And you believe they'll create an effective landscape for this project?
I do.
Last time a question had come up as to whether these species were on the approved township list. Are they?
They are, yes.
Now we can go to the imaging that you did. We start out with A21A. Can you explain basically how you created this and what it represents?
Yeah, we use some 3D modeling software, and we were able to import our CAD plans and actually create a very, very close representation to the real world for this particular site, including with the help of the architect and inserting the proposed structure, and then also inserting our landscaping on top of that, so that you could see what the plantings would look like on day one of installation based upon the sizes selected. And then,
Well, before you go, you talked about this last time, but In the foreground of that, that's a deck with a railing. What is that meant to represent?
That's meant to represent, if you were standing on Mr. and Mrs. Adams' rear deck, we were able to locate the exact elevation and put that into the model as well, so that we would have a very accurate representation of what it would look like if you were standing on the deck looking in the direction of the Kimmels.
And what you see in the background of A21, there's a structure there. I may not be using the proper architectural term, but there's like 3 gables.
Yes.
I don't know. Is that basically the enclosed sports court?
It is.
And it's hard to see, but is that chimney there to the left, the existing house?
Yes, that's the Kimmels residence there to the left.
And is this, you believe, an accurate representation of what it would look like at the time of planting?
Yes.
And then what's your next exhibit? A21B, what does this show?
A21B is the exact same perspective view, only showing the plant materials after approximately 5 to 7 years of growth.
And you believe that will be an accurate representation?
I do, yes.
And then last time you also did a view, I think, looking up the driveway from the end of the West Laurier Place cul-de-sac. Is that at A22A and B?
Yes, that's correct.
And can you explain what this shows?
This shows if you're driving up and approaching the Kimmels residence on their driveway, the existing vegetation along with some of the proposed vegetation. This is upon installation, so you really don't have any views of the structure at all upon installation from this view.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry, can I interrupt? This view is, the house would be to the left of what we're seeing at the end of this driveway?
That's actually the house you see vaguely right in front, yeah, it's sort of in the center of the image.
That's the house, that's not the...
Yes, that's the
new-
house. The structure is off to the right behind the trees. You can't see it at all.
Thank you. Sorry, George.
And you have one more, A22B?
Yes.
And what does that show?
This is the same vantage point looking up the Kimmels driveway after 5 to 7 years of plant growth, and you can see it's almost an identical image. The existing vegetation actually does a very good job of blocking the structure right away.
And you believe all of these will be an accurate representation of what it will look like?
I do.
That's all I have for Joe.
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, just a couple. What time of the year, these 3D images, what time of the year are they supposed to represent?
They're during the growing season, so, between May and, August.
How about the rest of the year?
Most of the screen plantings, can I go back to the other?
Yeah. You can look at your plan or your species list.
Yeah.
Just indicate which you're looking at for the record.
Right, this is Exhibit A19B. A majority of the plantings in the screen buffer are evergreen, so I believe that we will have very continuous coverage throughout the entire year, even in the winter months. There are a few existing deciduous trees on site which do provide cover, but we are very heavily utilizing evergreens in the design.
I have another question, actually. So, and maybe Mr. or Mrs. Adams is here tonight, but if you're standing on their deck today, what are you looking at from this Exhibit A-21A?
We may have a photo of that. I'm going to look back at A3 and see if there's any views of the existing lighted tennis court that we had in the record.
I believe from that vantage point now, I've never stood on their deck personally.
Yeah, sure.
But I believe you can see more of their house currently than you will be able to after this planting design is installed.
But I guess at the very least, you would see the light fixtures, the lights. on-
The
on
lights from
tennis
the
court.
house or the
No,
tennis court?
existing tennis court.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Would you be able, I'm just asking, would you be able to see the tennis court today? Are there trees there in the way now?
There are
or-
some trees, but their hedgerow of Leyland cypress ends, and we are extending additional screen trees to the left here.
Okay.
Again, I've never stood on their actual
Sure.
deck,
Understood.
so.
Understood. That's all I had.
I do believe there is testimony in the record from last time that it might have even been from Mrs. Adams that they can see the existing lighted tennis court. And I think that is pretty apparent if you saw the site.
Understood. Okay, thank you. Jim, any questions?
Just a couple.
Sure.
Mr. Bandy, the plantings that you propose to install between the proposed building and the Adams property would be planted below the level of the building, correct? Below the level of the new sports building.
With the new grading, the area in front of the proposed structure is much more level. We were actually able to raise up the plantings approximately 4 to 5 feet higher than the previous version because the retaining wall is no longer necessary because the drive and parking had been eliminated. So that allowed us to raise the grade and actually get that the second level of buffer plantings a little bit higher. I'm not sure I understand below the building. I mean, there is a slight grade down from the building for drainage, but it's not substantially lower.
Couple of feet?
Probably. I'd have to look at the contours, but probably.
Okay, so these plantings would then be planted a couple of feet below the base of the building?
Most likely, yes.
All right. And what would be the height of these species at the time of planting?
We're proposing 18 to 20-foot trees.
You've determined that you can get those?
Yes.
What's the growth rate on them?
Depending on the species, Norway spruce put on approximately 2 to 3 feet a year. Cryptomeria put on approximately 2 to 3. Green giant arborvitae put on 3 to 4 feet per year.
And with regard to the plantings along the driveway leading onto the property, are you aware of whether it's possible to put plantings there because of the nature of the easement?
We're not putting too many plants right there along that driveway edge. Most of what you see in that image that we prepared are existing plantings. We're behind them and bolstering that, but basically everything you see there right in the foreground is existing.
So all the plantings that you're proposing along the driveway are on the Kimmel's property?
Yes.
You're certain of that?
Yes, I believe so. I'd have to pull the plan. Can I see the plan back, George?
Thanks, Dave.
George, can I have my plans back?
And just, this is an easement area, but the Kimmels do have an easement over that. I was going to say, Mr. Blandy may not be familiar. That is an easement, but the Kimmels do have an easement over that.
We are actually putting all of our plants on the Kimmel's property. So that image was taken somewhere right down here, looking up in this direction, and the existing plants, all of the existing plants on the Adams property are not shown on this plan. So, but all of my proposed plans are on the Kimmel's property.
So looking at looking at sheet 2 of 2, the actual plan, show me where on that plan you're proposing to put plantings along the driveway.
We're not putting any plantings along the driveway here.
Where would they be then?
We're putting plantings in this area here. We're putting plantings all along this area here and plantings in this area here.
Okay, nothing along the driveway then?
As of right now, no.
Okay, thank you, that's all I have.
One other question. What's the life expectancy of these plantings you're proposing?
Well, every species is slightly different, but all are relatively long-lived. I would say 50 to 70 years on average.
Thank you.
I just wanted to wrap up with Steve Bollinger, the architect.
I do. Stephen with a V, Bollinger, Bollinger.
And I believe Steve was also qualified last time as an architect, so I would offer him as a expert in architecture.
No objections. Jim?
No objection.
Okay.
Steve, as Larry Kimmel indicated at the last hearing, Mr. Greenfield had suggested that the scope of the building could be reduced to allow for tennis play. The building was larger than it needed to be for tennis play. Can you confirm, there were some questions earlier, about the size of the building and if it is the minimum needed for tennis play, and then talk about a couple of the other areas?
Sure. The building is at the minimum needed for tennis play. We have shown a tennis court on the plan. There is typically 21 feet behind the baselines. We're showing 19 behind both baselines, so we are less than what is recommended. And typically they recommend 12 feet along the sidelines, and we're at 11 feet. So we are at the minimum for playing tennis in this building. There is also a connection to the house so that the owners can play year-round. And there's a small mechanical space that might get even smaller once we get into the design of the mechanicals.
And I think there might have been a question earlier. I don't know if you're able to say the size of the other areas.
I don't have that square footage with me at the moment. I could get that, though.
Okay. That's all I have for Steve.
Any questions from the board? Jim, any questions?
I have no question.
Thank you.
I think that is our case in chief. I would like to offer my exhibits into the record and reserve a right for some rebuttal if necessary. Thank you.
Jim?
You want to start now, or do you want to take a 5-minute break? What's the board's pleasure?
Board? 5-minute break?
Yeah.
Good idea.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to get started. I understand the applicant has one more piece of business. There were some unanswered questions for the first witness, and we'll address those.
David, if my notes were correct from what the board asked us to check in, one question I had in my notes was, what was the building footprint of the prior building in Appeal 3116?
The prior building had a footprint of 11,855 square feet.
And what is it again for this one?
8,579.
So what was the reduction?
3,276 square feet.
And then I think Mr. John Nagel asked about if you could make an estimate of the percent of the slopes that were disturbed.
Well, the one thing I wanted to point out is that when the survey was done, the area to the west of the site, the area really covered by vegetation, no topography was taken in there, so we don't have an analysis of the slopes. And I know that area rises significantly from Mill Road. So I know there are steep slopes in there. I just don't know how much there is. So I can't put a percentage on the whole thing based on that. Looking at all the slopes here, again, noting that these were man-made slopes, we took everything into account. There's roughly 17% of the slopes shown on this plan here being disturbed as part of this. But again, I think that number is significantly lower when you take into account other areas of the slopes that we don't have delineated.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Any questions for David? Jim?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
We call Thomas J. Comita as our first witness.
Dave, can I have you two? I don't get on
Thomas J. Comita, C-O-M-I-T-T-A.
Norma, do you know where we were with exhibit numbers on our side in the last proceeding? I think we had about 5. Should we start over with 1 for the purposes of this proceeding?
That'll be less confusing, I think. That'll be fine.
Okay, let's
Yes.
do that. We're going to offer Mr. Comita as an expert in planning, zoning, and landscape architecture. And I've spoken with Mr. Brosman, who is very familiar with Mr. Comita, and I think we have an agreement that he can be accepted as an expert.
Okay. No objection.
Thank you. I do want to pass his CV up to the board so that the board has it.
Thank you.
I might as well.
So we'll make that exhibit 01 for objectors. Is that? All right. Mr. Comita, do you have experience advising municipalities and private clients on land use matters in Pennsylvania?
Yes.
For how many years have you been doing that?
48.
How many zoning ordinances have you drafted for municipalities in that time period?
In Exhibit 01, there's a second page called By the Numbers, and the third item down indicates over 60.
And what's the history of your involvement with steep slope zoning provisions?
As a undergraduate landscape architecture student at Penn State, where I got my BSLA in 1971, and as a graduate student at Harvard University, where I received my Master of Landscape Architecture 1973. This was the time when environmental planning was at the forefront of the landscape architecture profession. So my training involved experience in mapping and writing ordinance amendments for steep slope. My 2 years in graduate school, I was the town planning intern for the town of Barnstable and Cape Cod. In the last 48 years, I've represented 133 municipalities in Pennsylvania. Our firm, Thomas Comita Associates, Town Planners and Landscape Architects, is currently the planning consultant and landscape architect for 23 municipalities in Pennsylvania. In the course of that work, over 48 years, I've written many steep slope conservation district ordinances. As indicated on the second page of 01, under item 11, I have reviewed over 5,000 plans, not all of which involve steep slopes, but many did. And I baptism by fire in 1973, first year out of graduate school, began to do a steep slope conservation district for Charlestown Township, Chester County, Pennsylvania, which is currently in effect and was adopted in the 1970s. In the 60 zoning ordinances I've written, all of them have included some steep slope regulations, sometimes called steep slope conservation district, sometimes called slope controls, like section 280-112 of the Radnor Township zoning ordinance.
What is the purpose of these steep slope regulations?
Well, first of all, I have to think about what is a slope. In the Philadelphia region, if you're in the city of Philadelphia, you're in the coastal plain physiographic province, relatively flat. As you get toward Easttown, you're in the Piedmont physiographic province, where many Delaware County and nearby Chester County municipalities have the slope controls. As you go close to the Poconos, you're in the Appalachian physiographic province, where I would say 90% of the municipalities in Lehigh and Northampton, Monroe, and Carbon counties have slope regulations because the land has gone from a flat coastal plain to the Piedmont rolling terrain to the Appalachian province where it's steeper. So therefore, the reason municipalities have the regulations for steep slope is because of the physical topographic environment that exists in Radnor Township in particular, which is why we're here tonight.
Is there provision for steep slope regulations in the municipality's planning code?
Yes.
And where is it found in the code, and what does it say?
In Article 6, Section 605, bear with me. Section 605 is titled Classifications. So Section 605, point, parens 2, paren small, Roman numeral 3, is preceded that all zoning districts shall have classifications, but additional regulations can be added for the purpose of adding additional classifications. And 6052 says, for the regulation, restriction, or prohibition of uses and structures at, along, or near, and then subsection 3 says, places of relatively steep slope or grade, and then it goes on to say, or other areas of hazardous geological or topographical features.
And how has Radnor implemented these steep slope regulations throughout its code and in its comprehensive plan?
Sure. As I mentioned, the slope controls are articulated in section 280-112, and the application before us relates to the variance relief requested in subsection 280-112D and E. And as I went through the Radnor Township Code, about which I am familiar because I was hired by to work on the downtown Wayne master plan about 12 years ago. So I was a subcontractor to Cahill Associates when we did the Wayne master plan. And we had to, and the subdivision land development ordinance amendments that are currently in the Radnor Township Code, I wrote. But I had to become familiar with the zoning ordinance. So being familiar with the zoning ordinance, I also know that all the sections of the Radnor Township Code have an intent or purpose section. And section 281.12 talks about the purpose of the slope controls, to limit erosion and sedimentation, to protect watersheds and limit increases in stormwater runoff, to prevent the increase in the possibilities of landslides and soil subsidence, to maintain adequate foliage cover on hillsides, and to protect streams from increases in sediment and pollution. And all articles in the code, as we know, are preceded by a general purpose in the zoning ordinance in Article 1, Section 280-1, Purposes and Objectives, the last sentence of which reads that all of the health, safety, and welfare provisions are to be viewed in accordance with the comprehensive plan for the township, which sets forth community development objectives in the comprehensive plan for Radnor Township. So what I then did is I went to the comprehensive plan to take a look.
All right, I want to pass a section of that up to the board as well.
Thank you.
O2. Mr. Committa, I've shown you Exhibit O2, which is a section of the Radnor Township Comprehensive Plan. Where in that section, and this is the beginning of Section 2 of that plan, where do you see a reference to steep slopes in the comprehensive plan?
Yes, Exhibit O2 starts with page 2-1 as an excerpt of the comprehensive plan of Radnor Township, and that plan is dated 2003. Section 2 the cover page of Exhibit O2, is titled Environmental and Natural Resources. It includes goals and objectives. The goal in the middle of the page, on page 2.1, talks about environmental values, and then in the objectives, it says to direct development to areas of minimum environmental sensitivity, prohibit development in areas of heightened sensitivity and values such as wetlands, floodplains, riparian zones, and steep slopes.
Okay, now are there also guidelines published by the Pennsylvania Land Trust Association for the treatment of steep slopes?
It's more of a survey of the state of the art of steep slope. Talks about some case studies. It talks about municipalities that have different techniques, but yes, there is a treatise that's been published by the Pennsylvania Land Trust Association.
Okay, I want to pass this up to the board and mark it as 03.
Yeah, I'll take another one. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Committa, what in Exhibit 03 is relevant regarding steep slopes?
I think the first page is, in the interest of time and brevity, what I like to point out to the zoning hearing board is just below the title, Steep Slope Ordinance, top left in Exhibit 03. It reads, and I quote, "Municipalities use zoning regulations to limit disturbance of steep slopes in order to prevent erosion, reduce the risk of dangerous landslides, and preserve scenic hillsides." And then down again on the first page of 03, in the introduction paragraph, it says, and I quote, "When disturbed, steep slopes are highly susceptible to erosion, landslides, and subsidence, which can endanger the public, degrade water quality, and damage structures. Furthermore, extensive earthwork or removal of vegetation on steep slopes can transform scenic views into eyesores." And so it goes on to talk about a number of considerations, different thresholds for mapping and so forth. And most of the reference to the slope thresholds are based on the U.S. Department of Agricultural Soil Survey, where they use the 0 to 3, 3 to 8, 8 to 15, 15 to 25, and 25 to 50%. However, in Radnor Township, in section 280.112, it actually makes reference to 14 to 20%, which I haven't seen yet on any of the applicants' exhibits. I might have missed it. I heard Mr. Fiorella's testimony on mapping the 20%. And in fact, the definition of steep slope in the Radnor ordinance does use 20% as the threshold. The question would be, why 14%? Why do municipalities have this intermediary level? It's based on research that's been done for the last 60 years on the lateral movement of leachates, if you're having a septic system, or groundwater, where once a slope is 12% or greater, there's a higher incidence of the vertical movement of subsurface material. I've never seen 14%. It's the first time I ever saw it in Radnor. I never saw it before. We may never see it again. But someone scientifically must have known something about that 12% threshold. It's mostly used east of the Mississippi. West of the Mississippi, they usually use 15%. But in any event, in the exhibits that we've been looking at, the areas that Mr. Fiorella testified to, are those that Dave cited by number and that are shown on the screen. It's not like there's a cliff at the edge of the boundary of those. They grade out to flatter slopes when the contours are further apart. But somewhere between the color codes on the drawing is this magical 14%. So there's a transition area, and when Dave Fiorello does his grading and stormwater and so forth, he'll figure that out. But it was curious to me that there was no mapping of the 14 to 20%, even though the...
I don't object because that was on the mapping. Mr. Fiorello testified to that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I just wanted to object. Mr. Fiorello did testify that those are shown on there. They're not regulated, but he did go over that, and they're shown here.
Do you have the exhibit number for that, George, just for our benefit?
That was the site plan.
It's for, is it for?
Is it A9?
Oh, A9.
A and B.
A9, A and B.
Thanks for clarifying. I did say I might have missed it, but I didn't hear in the testimony, so I apologize. I'm looking at this exhibit full size now, so thank you, Mr. Brosman. Thank you, Mr. Fiorello. Very good.
You noted that one of the problems with steep slopes is that they can promote the leaching of certain substances vertically, correct? Are there any other hazardous...
Horizontally.
Horizontally. Are there any other hazardous features of steep slopes that the board should be aware of?
Whatever they are usually get addressed by mitigation measures like terracing, retaining walls, as it relates to stormwater trenches.
How about erosion?
Drains.
Is erosion an issue with steep slopes?
Yes. As I mentioned in 03, and as is mentioned in section 280, 112A, yes. Erosion is mentioned in both.
And that can have downstream consequences, correct?
Correct.
In preparation for your testimony today, you reviewed the current plan, right?
Yes.
Did you also review the plan from the last proceeding that the applicant began before this board?
Yes.
And you have toured the property and the neighborhood?
Yes.
You've also been present for all of the testimony this evening, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I have some opinion questions for you. The first one is, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of certainty as an expert in planning, zoning, and landscape architecture as to whether the disturbance of more than 3,100 square feet of steep slopes is substantial on a lot of this size?
Yes.
What's your opinion?
That it is substantial.
In other words, not de minimis, correct?
Correct.
And when you say substantial, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think about the inverse of the question to say, is there a way that it would be not substantial? So my mind looks at the drawings and all the evidence to wonder if the building can be rotated to avoid the slope encroachment.
And in your view, could that encroachment be further minimized?
I believe so.
Yeah. Can you tell us how?
Well, the previous plan did encroach in the setback, and the current plan does not. In terms of the alignment of, can I see the exhibit packet, please?
Sure.
In terms of the alignment of the proposed plantings that was testified to recently, excuse me. By Mr. Joseph Blandy, in Exhibit A19, there is a alignment of proposed mostly evergreen trees that is kind of at the rim of one of the slopes. And I believe that the building could be rotated to avoid the slopes and be more in alignment with those plantings.
In that part of the property?
Yes. I also wondered, by looking to the east, about just moving the building to where the swimming pool is and will be vacated, and wondered about that area as well.
And is it your impression that a move to that area would diminish the encroachment on steep slopes?
I believe so.
Okay. What are the potential consequences of the disturbance of such a substantial amount of steep slopes on this property? Both downstream and for neighbors.
Well, the building's not going to be created by a helicopter. It's not going to be dropped in by a helicopter. The site has to be accessed. There will be grading. That would be in a future grading plan and stormwater management plan. And I believe from the provisions in 28112 about limiting erosion and sedimentation, protecting against stormwater runoff to limit the increase of runoff, preventing the increase in the possibility of landslides and soil subsidence, maintaining foliage on hillsides and protecting streams from increases. Those are the very reasons that we're here tonight, because those are what is articulated. And thereafter are use regulations. So the reason we're here in part is there's a variance application for a use that's not described in section 28112D. And then in terms of 28112E, there's also provisions for which the applicant needs a variance. And so, as I mentioned before, I review these plans all the time for 23 municipalities. I always try to determine alternatives to what otherwise would be adverse effects on steep slope encroachment. So I'm always looking at alternatives.
So you spoke for a moment about a use that's not specified in this district. Is the fact that the proposed structure, the sports structure, is double the size of the house, does that raise a use issue in your mind?
Well, I think Mr. Riley, or maybe Mr. George Nagel, sorry, I can't remember which one, asked the question, is this a appropriate accessory use? So I looked at the definition of accessory structure in the zoning ordinance, and I believe that it is. In other words, I think that in the definition of accessory building or accessory structure per the existing Radnor Township zoning ordinance, it is that. The thing that's curious is that it's bigger than the house, and it contains uses.
More than double the size of the house, right?
Well, I haven't measured, but let me take a.
Well, I can give you the numbers on that. The footprint of the house is approximately 3,900 square feet, and the footprint of the proposed athletic structure is more than 8,500 square feet.
Yes, thank you. So it's 8,579 square feet. So the terms of art are principal use and accessory use. When the accessory building and accessory use is larger than the principal building and the principal use, it gives rise to the question of, is it a possible, in my mind, is it a possible second use? and what's going to happen in that use. And so I think about the questions that you asked, Mr. Greenfield, about the activity there, and the items to which Mr. Kimmel testified about year-round tennis, et cetera. So it's very curious to me that such a large building is needed in a neighborhood that's normative, with single-family detached homes and garages and maybe small sheds and so forth. To have such a large building, it made me think, I wonder if we have two uses here, a recreational use and a residential use, as opposed to two, a principal and an accessory. But I couldn't find anything in the code that would specifically discount the addition. My only fear was that if the variance happens, just imagine everyone else proposes one of these in the neighborhood.
Given your understanding of what's on this property already, is it fair to say that this property has been reasonably developed?
Yes, and I say that because when I visited the site and neighborhood last Saturday, I drove all through the streets and so forth to see if I could find anything of the scale and proportion, the mass of this proposed structure, and I could not. So it's a 3-acre lot, and it appears to be very effectively used for the home, just like the other houses are. So to see the accessory structure like this was a bit overwhelming to me.
So with a large house, a pool, and a tennis court, it's already reasonably developed, right?
Correct.
So it's fair to say then that there is no topographical condition on the property which has, to this time, impeded reasonable development, right?
Correct.
And in your opinion, is the proposed use necessary to enable the reasonable use of the property at 328 West Laurier?
It is not.
Now, I think we've already covered the question of whether you could build this structure in a way that would further minimize the invasion of steep slopes. And I believe you talked about the area in which it's located, and you're also clear that you believe that could be done in the southeastern corner of the property?
Well, as Mr. Fiorello testified, the slopes are in various locations, as shown on the exhibit on the screen. And so if you move it to the east, there are slopes there that come into play. And if you rotate it on the west, there are slopes there. And the question would be, what would cause the least disturbance, because the Zoning Hearing Board doesn't need to grant the variance on what's being proposed, but there's the section in the municipality's planning code on the minimum variance.
And in your opinion, would this proposed sports facility in this neighborhood alter the essential character of the neighborhood in and around Laurier?
Oh, yes.
In what way?
Well, I think it's an unprecedented second building, and I think because of the fact that they need to have the height that they do and the size that they do, it takes on an extraordinary appearance. It's unprecedented. There's no other property that has anything of that scale and proportion.
Are you aware of an indoor sports facility of this magnitude anywhere else in Radnor Township?
I am not. I have worked in the area for 48 years. For about 2 of those, I worked for the township through KO Associates. I have relatives who live in Radnor. I've been here quite a bit. I was one of the many consultants hired by the owners of Androssen to do sketch plans for that, so I know that. Several years ago, many years ago, I testified for Todd Polig at Abrams Lane for a conditional use application there. I'm generally familiar with the township, but I haven't driven every road of the township, so there might be something there. I've not seen it yet.
Do you have an opinion as to whether this proposed variance would be detrimental to the public interest?
Well, I do, because I think cumulatively, when you go through 280, 112, when you go through the comprehensive plan, when you look at the provisions for, say, more delicate attention to Mother Nature, the question is, why should this building be given a variance to then disregard those other provisions? And I wonder if, as I said before several times, if there's any alternative that would involve less slope disturbance.
In your opinion, would the grant of this variance set a precedent that would be harmful to the township?
Well, it could to the township, to the neighborhood. I think slope encroachment is not that extraordinary, but by having such a large building that tips the scale for the encroachment, this is where I have the thought about these cumulative purpose of all these regulations and the size, scale, and proportion of the building. If there was some other sport that wasn't tennis, a pickleball building, or something that downsized it, then it might get tucked in or fit in differently. But at the size that it's in, it's very difficult to ignore the provisions that are in effect that we're here to discuss and analyze tonight.
In your opinion, would the approval of this variance reflect sound planning practices?
No.
And why is that?
Again, I think it goes toward alternatives, less slope encroachment. Would it be possible to connect it to the house on the east side? Would it be possible to rotate it on the west side? The architect did mention he's already skinnying up those dimensions of 11 versus 12 feet on one side. They probably have, squeezed it as much as they could. If you look at the existing tennis court, the bottom southeast corner of it is what encroaches on the setback. So if you imagine that the tennis court was not in the setback, it's also possible it could get away from the slopes. But I think even in my mind's eye, when I would rotate it, as Mr. Fiorello said, you're bumping against other slopes. So you're kind of between a rock and a hard place on this because of the size of the building.
And the only way to get around that would be to be less ambitious, correct?
Or to move it. I think if you moved it, however, you'd have to create like a second floor. Instead of the walkway being at grade, as it's currently contemplated, you would have to have like in Westchester, when we did the Historical Society expansion into the old Y, we had to run a skywalk from the second floor over. So if you did it where the current swimming pool is into the more level area, you would have to do something like that, as I read the contours.
So that's the only way you could connect it to the house to prevent the building from being considered accessory, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just a couple of questions about the, going to your expertise in landscape architecture regarding the proposed plantings. You heard Mr. Bandy say that the proposal is to plant evergreen trees that are 18 to 20 feet tall at the time of planting.
Yes.
In your experience, what is the extent of availability of trees of that height for planting?
In the last 20 years, I've only seen it once. The billboard south of Westchester Borough on Route 202 in Westtown Township, on the east side of that site, along Old Wilmington Pike, has evergreen trees to that height. On behalf of the municipalities for whom we work, we review landscape plans, we inspect the landscaping, we review substitution requests, and we make recommendations on escrow release submittals. In the last 20 years, and especially during supply chain issues and the increased development in the Delaware Valley, I've seen a substantial number of 6 to 8, 8 to 10, 10 to 12, 12 to 14 as the normative size of these trees. Perhaps Stony Bank has, access to a grower that other people don't have. So I don't know about it, but I've only seen it once in about 20 years.
And once in 20 years, and how many projects?
300.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
Any questions from the board?
I have a lot of questions. Why don't you start?
No, you will. After you.
So, if I understand your testimony, you're suggesting that rotating the orientation of the structure is a way of avoiding the disturbance of some of the steep slopes. Is that correct?
Possibly, yes.
And would the orientation of the structure as you've proposed look something like what the original plan looked like that this board was asked to consider a few months ago?
No, it would look like the existing tennis court moved about 8 feet to the north. So if you take the angle of the existing tennis court, the southeast corner of which encroaches on the setback, and you slide it to the north, just at the edge of the setback, you avoid slopes. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Perhaps my recollection is faulty, but I thought that the old plan was a similar orientation.
No, it's an orientation we haven't seen yet.
Okay. I'll leave that for others to delve further into that. You're suggesting that the structure is not an accessory structure?
No, to the contrary, it is.
Okay.
I said I looked at the definition. I couldn't find any reason why it wasn't.
And there was some mention made of it constituting an additional use of the property?
Yeah, when I visited the site on Saturday and saw the various previous and current plans, what jumped out at me was this large recreational facility that looked like some kind of sports club. So I wondered about it, and that's why I poured through the ordinance to see if there was anything that would otherwise speak to it, but I couldn't find anything.
So if there was not the walkway between the house, which is, I believe, definitionally the principal structure under Radnor's definition, given its residential use. And the sport facility, if those two were not connected, then it would be an accessory structure.
It would be
Wouldn't
a
it?
detached accessory structure,
Right.
yes, yes.
But your suggestion is that it is an accessory structure, and I'm not sure that that determination is consistent with the way the concept has typically been interpreted by this board.
Well, I think in any event, connect it however it would be connected, whether it would be connected if it were moved to the east or connected if rotated on the west. So it can be connected either way.
But you're saying that it's not part of the principal structure.
Well, I don't think it ever has been. It's just been shown to have this appendage.
I'll leave that question for others to delve further into it. There was some mention made of, in some way or another, a determination by this board, if this board was to grant relief, that it would somehow set a precedent. Is that your testimony, that somehow?
Yes.
You're then familiar, of course, with the fact that zoning rulings here in the township do not have precedential effect. And, I mean, each case is separate.
Oh, sure.
Each case has to present its own facts and make its own case. So would you then, with that understanding, suggest that this is going to set some sort of a precedent, or was that the use of that term in a somewhat more colloquial fashion?
Well, let's say colloquial. I think my main concern is the neighborhood itself. So we'll go with the small p colloquial, and then imagine that you grant the variance and they build the building, and then over the next series of years, other people come in to do other large buildings of this type, and it's sort of like, honey, I blew up the neighborhood with these accessory buildings. That's the part that I mean as a precedent.
So then strike that. Every future applicant's going to need a variance? Because if they don't, they're not coming here. And in fact,
Well,
if they can do things by right, regardless of size, regardless of whether it's acceptable to you in terms of a use, there are by right projects, are there not?
I agree. What I should have said was on steep slopes. So however it's by right, wherever impervious building coverage, God bless, I was just talking about a bad example. If there are other properties that also have steep slopes, that's what I meant.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I'll stop for now. I may have more.
Well, I guess touching on what John mentioned, if this was a flat backyard, despite the scope and not being in character with the neighborhood, it would be built because there's no other variance being asked for here. They'd be able to do it by right. So we really are just focusing on the steep slope issue here.
Correct.
Okay. And then I just wanted to clarify, you had talked about the overall, municipal regulations and so forth and the intent. And, when we talk about hardship, there has to be some kind of physical aspect of the property that's preventing them from doing what they want to do, but it has to be the reasonable use of their property. And you had mentioned, I guess, inverse analysis. So if it's not unreasonable, then does it pass that test? And what's your thoughts on what's considered reasonable or unreasonable use of a property?
Well, I think in your code, in the municipality's planning code, the criteria the zoning hearing board has to follow for your variance determination Mr. Brosman has put his best foot forward to say the topographic conditions on the site rise to the level that it's in front of you of a variance. Later down in those criteria is, will this use create an adverse effect on the neighborhood? And then later on it says health, safety, welfare, and then the last one is minimum variance. So cumulatively, I look at all of those. We know we're here. The applicant has the administrative right and the remedy request because that's what you're allowed to do in Pennsylvania. And that's why we're here. The question is, when you deliberate and weigh all the evidence, does this rise to the level that it's putting 10 gallons in a 5-gallon container and therefore it tips the scale? That was my takeaway.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had for now.
You're welcome.
George, do you have any questions?
Good evening, Mr. Committa.
Good evening, Mr. President.
How long have you been involved in this matter?
2 weeks and 48 years.
I meant this case.
2 weeks.
And you said you toured the property. Did you go on to the Kimmel property without permission?
I don't think so. I was told by Mr. Adams and Mr. Mullen approximately where the boundary was. And I stood on the line and I got out my iPhone and I took a picture. I might have been 1 foot or 1 inch over, I don't know, but I thought I was at the edge.
But you didn't go on the property to investigate these things?
I did not. I didn't ask for any permission, but I did.
All I'm asking, did you go on the property? You said you had toured the property. You toured it from the edge?
Oh, I'm sorry. I toured the neighborhood and I toured the Adams and Mullen property, and I walked up the driveway to where Mr. Mullen said he owned to the end of, and I walked up to that edge.
So you weren't able to see, for example, the portion of Area 5B that would be disturbed?
Not
that's
until I
behind the
saw your
house?
photos. Correct.
And the same for Area 4?
Correct.
And same for Area 3?
Correct.
And I assume for most of Area 2?
I could only see it through the deer-eaten cryptomeria on the edge and through the fence when I put my zoom on my photo. But I saw the walls, but I didn't walk on it. Perhaps the zoning hearing board should do that.
I'm going to jump around a little bit, if you don't mind. Are you familiar with Joe Blandy?
Never had the pleasure of meeting him.
He didn't do any work with you on your property?
Maybe my wife knows him, but I apologize. I never met him.
Okay. You're not a licensed engineer, are you?
No, I am not.
And when you talked about other plans where you mentioned things might be able to go, you didn't prepare any plans, did you?
No, I did not.
You spoke about Section 28112, the Radnor code that I had put in for convenience at Exhibit A17.
Oh, yes.
Isn't it true that in the Radnor code, at Section 28112, Section I, there's an exemption. This section does not apply to steep slopes created as a result of compliance with 17511A and B of the Code of Radnor. Is that correct?
Could you give me the exact citation? I'm not seeing 5.
It's 28112 I.
Oh, I. Okay. Aye, okay. Section does not comply. Yes, I see it.
And you heard the testimony about Mr. Kachansky making a determination that certain areas were exempt?
Yes, and I heard Mr. Fiorella mention that 5A and 6 were
Right.
those areas.
And isn't it true that the way this is interpreted is if there's man-made slopes that a grading permit was obtained, they're exempt under this provision, correct?
Correct.
So if these other man-made slopes had had a permit or were created when the township had a regulation for a permit, they would be exempt also, correct?
Presumably, yes.
You said you've reviewed over 5,000 plans. Was that right?
Usually about 5 a day, maybe at this point over 6,000.
And I imagine in some of those plans there were involved some steep slope variances or waivers from steep slope provisions?
Very many of them, yes.
And they, in your experience, they have been granted?
Some have and some have not. I don't have a number. It's 50-50. I don't know what the number is.
You mentioned one of the concerns about slopes is leaching of sewage and things like that?
Yeah, and anything that flows horizontally below ground, whether it's leachate, groundwater, flood water, what have you. It just so happens that when you're steeper than 12%, there's a higher incidence for the lateral movement of anything liquid below surface.
And isn't it true this property is connected to public sewer?
Yes.
And public water?
Correct.
You mentioned that the footprint of the structure was bigger than the footprint of the house. I think Mr. Greenfield gave you the numbers. Isn't it true that the house, though, has 3 levels and is around 10,000 square feet?
Yes, according to the plan, it says existing 2.5-story dwelling, and I'm sorry, I didn't write down that square footage, but whatever you said it is.
And you acknowledge there's an existing lighted tennis court there on the property now?
Oh, yes.
And wouldn't you agree if for some reason that property owner wanted to remove that, you'd probably you would disturb areas 2, 3, and 4?
Could you repeat that? I'm not sure I follow the question.
If I turn to A9, the existing condition plan, which shows the existing tennis court, if all the Kimmels wanted to do was completely remove that, isn't it true they'd have to disturb many of these same areas?
It depends. Right now, there's a retaining wall on 3 sides. If they kept the walls there to make a garden, they possibly wouldn't have to. It depends on what they would do.
But if they wanted to remove the walls, or if the walls became in poor shape, then you would disturb those areas?
It depends. I mean, you could delicately remove them with minimal disturbance. It depends on what the future disposition would be.
We incorporated the record from the last proceeding, and in this current package, I included, for convenience, another copy of the original plans for Laurier. Did you see those when you were looking at the exhibits?
Not yet.
It's at A4.
I'm looking behind tab 4 now.
Yeah, A4A.
Yes.
Isn't this the plan for the Laurier development that we're talking about?
Oh, yes.
And isn't it true that the property is one of the largest properties in the development?
Oh, yes.
And isn't it true that you mentioned a colloquial small p precedent? Most of the lots in Laurier would not appear to be big enough to have a tennis court, correct?
Correct.
And isn't it true, we already said that this property already has a tennis court. The adjoining lot, 13, they already have a tennis court, correct?
Yes.
And they have other large accessory structures, do they not?
Correct.
Do you know what some of those are?
Swimming pool, kind of ornamental gardens. Yeah.
Do they have a large greenhouse?
I apologize, I don't know.
I'm going to show you a aerial. I think I was up to A22. I'll call this A23.
Thank you.
These are two side-by-side images. This is the original house on Laurier on lot 13, and I've circled some areas and labeled some areas. Do you agree with me that number 3 is the pool that you just mentioned?
George,
yes.
can you put those on the table for
Oh, I'm sorry.
the viewing audience, please?
I always forget we're on TV.
Thank you.
So number 3 is their pool. Number 2 is a sports court.
Yes.
Number 1, that's a greenhouse, isn't it?
I will accept your identification. The Google Earth aerial that I concentrated on, I cropped off at the edge of their sports court.
And you, isn't it true, as Mr. Fiorello said, that this plan will actually reduce impervious coverage over what is there today?
I accept Mr. Fiorello's testimony.
And do you accept Mr. Fiorello's testimony that the plan is well under the permitted building coverage for the lot?
I haven't checked it, but I would accept his testimony.
And also that it complies with all applicable setbacks?
Yes.
Now, the slope regulations that you mentioned, they don't control the size of the building, correct?
Correct.
And your exhibit 02, which was an excerpt from the Radnor Comprehensive Plan,
Oh, yes.
that talks, in fact, the heading of it is Environmental and Natural Resources. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then throughout the document, it's speaking of natural resources.
Oh, yes. And steep slopes, as I mentioned during my testimony.
And in 03, the preamble that you mentioned, it talks about erosion, dangerous landslides, and scenic hillsides. Is that correct?
Yes.
And isn't it true that, as Mr. Fiorello said, that this plan will have to have a grading permit that will be reviewed by the township?
Yes.
And during that type of review, those things are checked, isn't that true?
Yes. What's not checked, and what relates to that point you just made on scenic hillsides, is the aspect of the site. The topography rises on the site. So when you perch a 30-ish foot high building at the top of the slope, on the slopes, you perch it up to be in these sections that talk about transform scenic views into eyesores. That's where my concern was, that I said cumulatively.
Now, we don't concede that the building could go over here, but if the building went over here on top of Area 7, that's a higher area than is proposed. Isn't that true?
Okay, bear with me. By about 8 to 10 feet higher, yes.
And that would be much closer to some of your clients, Lot 13 and the Mullins, correct?
Correct.
And even though they're not all regulated, there's quite a drop in grade there to deal with. Isn't that true?
Fortunately, it's not one of the steeper of the sites, but yes, in fact, it does descend from the higher elevation, which is why they put the swimming pool there in the first place.
That's all I have for Mr. Committa at this time.
Anything else?
A couple of quick ones.
Sure.
Mr. Brosman asked you some questions regarding exemptions in the code from the requirements of 280 112. Do you recall those questions?
Oh, yes.
Was it your understanding in taking a look at this plan that there was an agreement in place between the applicant and the township that the disturbed slopes we're talking about were all regulated by Section 112?
Oh, yes.
When you talked about precedent, you weren't referring merely to Laurier, is that correct?
Correct.
Your concern about precedent applied to the entire township?
Oh, yes. The next case that could come here next month, whatever.
And one other question, and this relates to Mr. Brosman's questions about the likelihood that a grading plan would be required. If a grading plan could obviate the concern about disturbing steep slopes, would there ever be any need for a steep slope ordinance?
Well, I think there should always be a steep slope ordinance. The question is, what is the most effective way to mitigate adverse effects?
So if the notion that an applicant would ultimately have to apply for a grading plan would obviate concerns about steep slope disturbance, then the steep slope ordinance would never be enforced, correct?
I see what you're saying. Presumably, you're correct.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on the board? Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Anything else, George?
Is Jim done? Oh, no, I have nothing else.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have no other witness.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Unless some of my clients want.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second.
Could I have a couple of rebuttal points, please?
Well, let me ask a question, Jim. Your clients, you'd like to give them a chance to speak as parties or just in public comment?
Well, I would anticipate that the board would take their comments as parties with an interest in the outcome of the case.
And allow for cross-examination and so forth?
I think that anyone that appears before the board, whether it's as a party or simply a member of the public, is subject to cross-examination.
Sure, okay. Well, let's just do it, we'll do it all at one time then.
Okay.
We'll do it all at one
That's
time.
Sorry, were you waiting for me?
Yeah, it's That's it.
Could I recall Joe Blandy? Joe, there was some question raised about your ability to get the trees of the size that you mentioned. Are you confident you will get those, and how will you get those?
Yeah, absolutely. We have I have a 24-acre nursery at my property. We grow on specimen quality trees to larger sizes there. I also have a vast network of nurseries of a higher caliber that specialize in larger trees, such as Halka nurseries, Moon nurseries, and many more. So I could fulfill that plant order within a couple of weeks if I needed to. So I have no doubt that the gathering of these plants would be any problem.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Any questions from the board? Any cross, Jim?
And then quickly, David Fiorello. David, did you hear the testimony of Mr. Comita?
I guess I did.
I asked him, he had said that it isn't good to build on a high point when there are slopes involved. And I asked him about the height of the area of slope 7 and 5B compared to where the proposal was. Did you agree with his characterization of the height?
My view of the plan is our elevation. I thought it was on. I'm sorry. Our plan shows the proposed finished floor elevation of the tennis court at 309.25. The area up in the area of the swimming pool, it's terraced. You'd have to fit the building in there and work the grades around it. There would probably be some cut and some fill, but I'm just off the top of my head, I'm seeing a finished elevation there in the area of, let's say, 332, 333, even 330. So there's more than an 8 to 10 foot elevation difference there. It's closer to 20, maybe 25, depending on what that final elevation of the building would be in that location.
So that would require disturbance of area 7 and 5B?
Yes.
And that would be much higher?
Elevation higher? Or?
Than we just talked about the building?
Yes. I would envision it to be at least another 20, 30 feet higher than where it sits now.
And it would be much closer to two other properties than the current?
Yes, it would.
And are there, in addition to the disturbance of 5B and 7, are there, in your opinion, challenges with the topography in that area?
I did a quick overlay of a footprint while I was in the back of the room. Took a little dolly of the footprint here and placed it in an area here. There's roughly a 14-foot elevation difference between one end of the building and the other in that location. So there's a significant amount of grading that would be required at both ends of the site, probably that whole the whole side of the property in order to get a building in that location.
And then you would still be removing, if that was feasible, which we say it isn't, you would still remove the old tennis court?
You would remove the old tennis court. If the walls were to be removed, you'd be stuck with the vertical faces of soil, which are something I would not recommend. They would have to be graded back, and I think, again, if those walls were removed, that area would have to be graded, and those slopes would have to be disturbed with the removal of those walls.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Anything, Jim?
No question.
Okay. Anything from the board? Thank you, David. Okay, we'll have public comment at this time, and afterwards, I'll give both of you an opportunity to give a very short summary. Is there any public comment? And I'll remind you, the only issue we're dealing with tonight is variance to a steep slope ordinance. So that's the issue that I just remind you to keep your comments directed to that issue. Thank you. Any public comment? Okay, seeing none. George, you want to give your summation?
Thank you. I'll try to keep it brief since we spent a long time tonight. Thank you for all of your attention to this matter. As Larry Kimmel mentioned, I think at the last closing, Mr. Greenfield had made a point that the structure could be made smaller so you could play tennis. That's exactly what the Kimmels have done. There's an existing tennis court there now. It's lighted. It's got basketball hoops on it. People could play there, even in the cold. The Kimmels prefer not to. So they removed all of the other elements. They have minimized the relief. We do believe it's a reasonable use of the land. You saw the plans for Laurier, the testimony. This is the second largest property in Laurier. The other properties could not support this. So when you're considering for a dimensional variance, I submit to you whether something is reasonable. You should consider the size of the property. You should consider there's already a tennis court here. Tennis courts are a common accessory use, simply seeking to enclose. You should consider the testimony of David Fiorello. This meets every zoning regulation for the size of the structure. And as Mr. Comita admitted, the slope controls don't control the size of the structure. I'm not saying that's not to some degree relevant to your determination, but that's really, I think when you're determining if it's reasonable, you also look at how does it stack up to the zoning criteria. We moved it out of the setback. We even moved it further. We moved it further from the Adams. Impervious is being decreased. We're way under the building coverage, only 9 point something percent when 20% is required. Mr. Comita admitted he had never even seen these slopes. I submit to you when you look at the photographs and you look at it on the plan, these are clearly man-made. They're not the scenic natural hillsides that are talked about in the documents submitted. And even under the Radnor Code, there's an exemption for slopes exactly like these. It just so happens that the slopes around the tennis court are really old, and there wasn't a mechanism to get a permit back then. And some of the other slopes were created as, minor field changes when the house was built. So had they been built at the time of a permit, or had the field changes been duly noted, we wouldn't even be here. They would be exempt. And I bring that up to go to the point of, is this really a natural hillside that you have to worry about erosion and all of that? David Fiorello testified that that is not a concern with these type of slopes, and the plan that will be implemented and reviewed. So we ask that you take into account all the changes the Kimmels have made to try to address the concerns, and we do believe that the standards are now met for a variance, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, members of the board, for your indulgence in this case. It's now the second time around, and you've had to listen to a great deal of testimony, and we appreciate your attention to it. Mr. Kimmel made an important admission during his testimony, which I think has to govern in large measure this board's deliberations, and that is he conceded that what he wants to do with this project is aspirational. It's not necessary. There is absolutely no dispute on the facts in this record. This property is already reasonably developed. I think everybody can bring their experience to bear on this, but I think we all know that a $1.8 million property with a house with a 3,900 square foot footprint and a tennis court and a swimming pool is already quite more than reasonably developed. So this variance is not necessary to enable the reasonable development of the property. And under the tests that are set forth in the MPC, in the Radnor Code, and in all the cases we cited in our memorandum, that's enough right there to defeat this variance application. The applicants, though they've attempted to diminish the amount of steep slope disturbance and the scope of the project, are not entitled to a reward for reducing an absurdly grandiose proposal to one that might appear on its surface to be a little bit more reasonable. But as I think you heard Mr. Comita say, the degree of steep slopes disturbance proposed here is substantial. It's not in any sense de minimis. And I keep hearing raise the issue of man-made steep slopes, which I think we have moved past, as we had last time, because there's been an agreement in place between the applicant and the township that all of the slopes we're talking about are regulated under Section 112 of the code. So the issue of whether they might be man-made doesn't come into play. Once we all are on the same page with the understanding that these slopes are regulated, then a variance is necessary, and the applicant has to meet the standards required by law. You received some letters, I know, from I think you have 12 letters before you, and by my count, 7 of those were favorable to this proposal. But you should keep in mind that among those 7, 5 were from property owners who are remote to this site. They are literally at the other end of the Laurier development. So among the people who are in West Laurier, closer to this proposed development, indeed about 80% of them are opposed to this. And after hearing Mr. Comita's testimony about the adverse consequences of steep slope disturbance of this nature, it's not hard to figure out why the immediate neighbors are opposed. This is something in a very sensitive area of the township on property that is somewhat steeply contoured, that could have adverse downstream consequences, not only for the immediate neighbors in Laurier, but downstream of that area as well. So there's been no showing of hardship in this matter. There's nothing relating to the physical characteristics of the property that make it impossible to be reasonably developed in strict conformity with code, and it already has been reasonably developed. This is entirely unnecessary. You heard Mr. Comita's testimony, uncontradicted, that the variance will alter the essential character of the neighborhood. There's nothing like this anywhere in Radnor Township. No other witness has suggested that there is. And I think you also have enough evidence before you to conclude that this is not the minimum deviation possible from the code, that there are other configurations. If the applicant wanted to build a structure, there are other places and other configurations that would reduce the size of the structure, relocate it, and thereby reduce the disturbance of steep slopes. And in fact, you know you have although you have a building before you now that's smaller than it was the last time, it's still approximately 18% larger than the area that you need to play tennis. I mean, you know, the evidence is you need 7,200 square feet for a tennis court. You have 8,500 square feet plus as the footprint for this proposed building. So you're well in excess of what's necessary to play the sport and to enclose that area if all you want is an athletic court. The Kimmels have a very nice tennis court. They have the opportunity to use it to play outdoors. The sole purpose for this application at this point is that they want to be able to play indoors as well. Not a need, it's a desire, it's a dream, as Mr. Kimmel said. I think it's a wonderful dream, but it doesn't get you a variance under law, either under Radnor Township practice or under state law. Again, we appreciate the board's attention to this. I have two other cases that I can hand up to you beyond those that were cited in the brief. In both of these cases, and I'll give George copies, there were one decided in December of 2021, so only about 3 months ago. The other decided in 2010. They were both cases in which variances from steep slope ordinances were proposed and ultimately rejected by the courts. And so as I pass those up, with that'll conclude the argument. We thank you. We think this variance has to be denied under the circumstances.
Thank you.
Oh, and I possibly forgot to mention, we moved the admission of all of our exhibits.
Thank you. Get it in the file. There's 2 cases. Okay.
May I hand in a case?
Yes, you may, and they'll be put in the record, whether we're going to read them this minute or not.
One more thing real quick. The precedent issue is very important here. This would be a precedent that would apply to the entire township, not just to Laurier. And that's an important thing to consider because you're disturbing potentially 3,100 square feet of steep slopes here. If you allow that, you're liable to get a lot more applications to disturb up to that level of steep slopes. And if you start granting these types of variances, the steep slope section of the code may as well not exist. Thanks.
If I could just say the case I handed in, the Klein case, it wasn't on slopes directly, but it's a case that basically confirmed that a tennis court is considered typical accessory use, even if there aren't a lot of them. So I'm submitting that for the proposition that it is a reasonable use of the property. And, you know, on the 3,100 square feet, we think that's a small amount given the 3 acres that you have to look on the overall size of the property. And also, Mr. Fiorello's testimony was that it was 17% of the slopes that he was able to measure, but there were a lot of other slopes in the woods that he couldn't measure, so that's going to even be a lower percent. So we disagree that in this case, it's a substantial amount of slopes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a motion from the board for discussion?
I would move that the request for a variance be denied.
Can I request that you do that in the affirmative so we don't have a lot of double negatives in our discussion? And if you're against it, you can vote against it. I'm going to suggest that you make the motion in favor of the application, and if you decide to oppose it, you can just vote against that instead of doing the double negative thing. You can do what you want. That was my suggestion. Is there a second? Second. Okay. So the motion is to deny the application. Okay. Discussion.
Well, we've had lots and lots of testimony. We've seen lots and lots of documents. But first off, this is not necessarily the tennis court that was debated and under consideration in McCungy, because on top of the tennis court was not the structure that's being proposed here. The property already has a tennis court. If it's technically deficient in some manner, it can be fixed. the one thing I haven't heard here, and I have to agree with Mr. Greenfeld, I haven't heard anything about hardship. It's assumed, I think, or it's suggested, but the case law clearly says that there has to be a problem with the property, not that prevents it from being used in a reasonable manner, which is in an R1 district as a residence. And what I'm hearing, and I can't get away from this, is that that tennis court that's already there, which is a reasonable use, just isn't good enough because you can't use it all year long. So they come and ask for a variance. Under the law of the Commonwealth, that doesn't amount to a hardship, not as it's defined by the case law. We'd have to ignore the case law. George, the case you handed up is interesting. Yes, it's an accessory use. I don't think anybody's making a real issue out of that, even though there was a dissent in that case. But nonetheless, it doesn't take away from the fact that you need a variance for this accessory use, and I don't think you've shown, in fact, I know you haven't shown, the requisite hardship that's required by the law of this Commonwealth. That's why I propose that we deny the request.
I'll go next. I'm actually in favor of it, and part of the reason is that, I think homeowners in the township should be able to use their properties, not as they want necessarily, but it's 10:30 and I'm not coming up with the right word that I want to use, but most certainly, but for the steep slopes, the Kimmels would be able to build this building, and as long as it complies with every other aspect of our code, they'd be able to build this building. So to the hardship, I kind of agree, John. It's sort of implied in what's been presented to us that the slopes themselves present the hardship. And so why I'm in favor of it, look, I think the structure is minimally designed. I think the location is the best location on the property. We had testimony to support that. The location most certainly limits the disturbance to the steep slopes, and it's designed purposefully to limit that disturbance. And, when I look at the totality of the circumstances and the plan itself, I fall on the side that I think it's a reasonable proposal and a reasonable use. And for me, I think they've hit the criteria, and the application should be approved.
Anyone else want to speak? I'll just add a couple more points. I am in favor of the application. I think the hardship is the slope, obviously. The question is it a reasonable use of the property? Do they have reasonable use of the property without this variance? There's a tennis court there now. Is it reasonable to have a tennis court with a building on top of it? In my opinion, it's not unreasonable. It's not an unreasonable use of that property. Regarding the character of the neighborhood, depends on what neighbor you're looking at. If you look at the neighbor to the east, they're very much in character. The outbuildings and the pool and everything else. It's a 3-acre property, and except for this, grading permit that wasn't done correctly, and I understand it's not relevant, but they would have been able to do this without any kind of zoning variance. So I'm going to approve it. Any other comments?
The word reasonable is doing a lot of heavy lifting here tonight. I'm going to try to remove the subjectivity around that term by instead pointing to the code, which has been enacted by the elected officials of this township and has made the determination that this type of use is an acceptable use in this zoning district. So if the use otherwise complies with the remaining requirements for the structure in the district, then you have a reasonable proposal. I might, a less lawyerly approach might reach a different conclusion. But as we find ourselves guided by the code and its provisions, I think that the conclusion has to be that it is a reasonable use. Now, okay, if you've made that determination, then we turn to the issue of the magnitude of the variance that is required to permit that permitted use. This plan is distinctly different than the last plan. This plan disturbs less steep slope. The testimony leads me to conclude that much of the steep slope that's going to be disturbed is not rolling, pristine, scenic hillsides, but was a function of the construction of the property itself. And we're not doing a harm to nature or setting a dangerous precedent for future applicants with similarly sized lots by saying, in this case, that this quantum of disturbance is permissible. Again, it's a reasonable use. I do not think that the disturbance of the steep slopes as described in the testimony and shown on the plans is excessive, and as a result, I am going to vote against the motion, which is to deny the application.
Thank you, John. Any further comments from the board? Okay, so we're going to have a vote on the motion. If you're in favor of the motion, you're denying the application. Okay. John.
First of all, I just want to thank the Kimmels for working very hard to address all the issues. However, I don't believe that you really have demonstrated a hardship, so I am voting in favor of the motion.
Thank you. John?
I am voting in favor of the motion.
Rich?
Nay.
John?
Nay.
I am also voting against the motion, meaning in favor of the application. So congratulations, the application's been approved 3-2. Good luck with your project.
Well, Mr. Chairman, would I ask, can we have an affirmative motion approving the variance? Yeah, that's why the motion should be done in the affirmative. So you can, otherwise you'll have to do two motions every time.
Right, we haven't taken action to actually
Exactly.
approve it. We have taken action to reject a motion. I would move that the applicants be granted the relief as requested in the application in accordance with the plans and testimony presented here this evening.
Second.
In favor of the motion?
Yes, I am in favor of the motion.
I'm in favor of the motion.
Aye.
I vote against the motion.
Okay. Motion passes 3-2. The application is approved. Good luck with your project. Thank you, everyone. Good night.